Today, we're diving deep into one of the most unsettling questions in psychology. What is going on inside the mind of a serial killer? We're going to trace a really disturbing but absolutely critical psychological pathway, one that can lead from a troubled childhood to some of the most violent acts you can imagine. Let's get into it. Right? It's the ultimate question. It's what fuels so many documentaries, books, and maybe even our own darkest curiosities. Is it nature? Nurture? Something else entirely? Well, this explainer is going to get right to the heart of that by tracing a common psychological map, one that researchers found by studying some of history's most infamous murderers. And the information we're looking at, it comes from a really fascinating doctoral dissertation from Walden University. So this isn't just speculation or some wild theory. Nope. This is a serious academic study that actually found distinct patterns in all that chaos, giving us a structured way to look into the abyss. The research zoomed in on the detailed case files of 12 U.S. male serial murderers. And by narrowing the focus down like this, the researcher was able to isolate a really powerful and recurring sequence in how their minds developed. And we're not talking about obscure cases here. You'll recognize these names. The study included notorious figures like Kemper and Ridgway, names that are tragically pretty familiar. And because their lives are so well documented, their own words and their own histories actually form the bedrock of this whole analysis. Okay, so to really get this, we need to understand a key idea, the trauma control model. Basically, the theory is that really devastating experiences in childhood can create this overwhelming need for control later in life, a need so powerful it can eventually explode into violent, homicidal behavior. This model, it's our key to unlocking the entire pathway. So, how does this all get started? Well, the path to murder, it doesn't begin with violence. It begins with pain. It starts with a kid's desperate attempt to just escape a reality that's become completely unbearable. You know, when a child goes through profound trauma or feels totally rejected by their parents and friends, they often have to retreat somewhere, and that somewhere is their own mind. It becomes the only safe place they have. So they build these elaborate internal fantasy worlds just to get away from the pain and feel a sense of security their real life just won't give them. And this is a really critical turning point. Take Kemper. The research found that what started out as simple daydreaming, a pretty common way for kids to cope, slowly twisted into something much, much more sinister. By the time he was just 10 years old, his escape fantasies were already getting tangled up with violence and death. You can see how the whole purpose of that fantasy world just shifts dramatically over time. A child's fantasy is all about escaping reality to find safety. But for these individuals, the adult fantasy becomes about controlling reality to feel powerful. Imaginary friends, they get replaced by imaginary victims. And that leads us right into the second stage. That little seed of fantasy planted in childhood trauma now starts to grow into a monstrous blueprint for real-world violence. So in adulthood, that inner world is no longer a defensive shield. It's become an offensive weapon. The fantasies are now basically rehearsals, super detailed plans for capturing, possessing, and controlling other people. It becomes the main outlet for a whole lifetime of rage that's been bottled up inside. This quote from Kemper himself is, well, it's chilling, and it gives us a perfectly clear window into this mindset. For him, the ultimate act of control wasn't just about ending a life. It was about the absolute, total possession of another human being. And this brings us to the final, absolutely terrifying stage, the moment that fantasy breaks through into reality. This is where murder becomes a grotesque, twisted form of connection. So to understand this stage, there's a key clinical term we have to know, paraphilia. In the context of this study, it's basically the fusion of sexual arousal with violence, with control, and with non-consent. This is the psychological engine that's actually driving the homicidal act itself. Now, this might be the most profound and disturbing finding from the entire research. The act of murder becomes a twisted attempt at intimacy. I mean, think about it. For someone whose entire life has been defined by rejection, killing is the one way to force a connection with another person where rejection is literally impossible. Joel Rifkin's case is a perfect and horrifying example of this. He started by paying for attention, just to guarantee there'd be no rejection. But when that wasn't enough to satisfy his warped needs, the ultimate act of control, strangulation, became, in his mind, intimate. And this is how those paraphilias actually show up in the real world. You've got sadism, where inflicting pain brings gratification. Necrophilia, the ultimate control over a person who can't reject you. Developing fetishes for objects tied to the victim. And taking trophies. All of it is designed to keep that fantasy of possession alive, long, long after the murder is over. So, after going down such a dark path, it's totally fair to ask, what's the point? Why does understanding any of this even matter? Well, the answer is absolutely crucial. And let's be crystal clear about this. The goal of this research is not to create sympathy or make excuses for these killers. Not at all. It's about identifying a pattern. Because if you can map the road to violence, you have a chance to build roadblocks. And that is the very first step toward prevention. And here's where it becomes practical. Understanding this trauma fantasy violence pathway can help teachers and mental health professionals get better at spotting risk factors in kids. This knowledge can help create early interventions to try and redirect those dangerous inner worlds. And for law enforcement, it helps criminal profilers get a better handle on the motives of an unknown offender, which could potentially help solve cases faster. So this dissertation, it lays out a pretty clear pathway, but it also leaves us with a huge challenge. The human mind is a private world, right? And fantasy is a normal part of life. So the critical question this research really forces us all to confront is this: how do we, as a society, get better at recognizing when that private world is about to become a very public nightmare?